Many have been actively engaging and organizing against federal immigration enforcement and the killings of Americans at the hands of immigration agents. It's been true in Minneapolis, where thousands have taken to the streets, and it's spread from there to Detroit and many other places across the nation. Scenes in America this past weekend harkened back to the civil rights era, with people taking to the streets, students walking out of class, and businesses shutting down for a national day of protest against ICE and the Trump administration. All these actions have us wondering, what has been the efficacy of these protests against ICE thus far? And when exactly is a protest successful? Gloria J. Browne-Marshall is a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She's also the author of A Protest History of the United States. She's here to explore all this. Professor Browne-Marshall, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much.
First, Professor, you point out in your book that protests can take many different forms. So let's set the foundation for folks, if we could. When you talk about protests, what kinds of actions are you referring to?
I'm referring to people progressively standing up to fight for a better world, that there's a goal in mind. So there may be an oppressive law. They want to change that law. The goal is to change that law. So they may do so by sending letters to that politician, or sending letters to those to tell them to unelect that politician next time. So their voice is being heard that way. Another way is to actually stand with a sign in front of that politician's office and say, we don't approve of what you're doing. It could be that politician has a business, and therefore the voices of the people can be heard economically by not buying the products of that particular politician's business. So there are ways in which people can send letters to the editor, to the newspaper. They can go online. They can figure out ways in which they can have conversations, teach-ins in their communities to teach people about the issues they're protesting against or protesting about. So all of these things have been a part of it. And there have been artworks. Maybe there's a mural, as you saw with Black Lives Matter, in Washington, D.C., where the street was painted. So there are many ways in which people can participate, and they can fund those who are participating in the protest outright by saying, I don't want to be the person in the street, but I will give you money to buy those signs. I will give you money to take the bus to that politician's office. So those are just a few ways that people can participate in a protest.
Now let's think about this moment, if we could, Professor. When you watch protesters against ICE in Minneapolis and elsewhere across the country, what do you make of the significance of what protesters are up to at this moment? What have they accomplished thus far?
What we started off with were rallies. You saw rallies where people came together on a Sunday afternoon, and they had signs with, quippy sayings, and they were coming together. I thought they were coming together, and this is my analysis, because we had been so separated by COVID, by social media, that it took time for communities to remember they are in a community, for people to say, oh, I see you. So those months were rallies for the most part, because most protests disrupt. And if you have a group of people coming together on a Sunday where the offices are closed, then you're not going to really be disrupting too much. It's moved now in the evolution of protests to, we have a shared point of concern, to now we have to let the government know our concern is of such a degree that we cannot allow you to continue doing the status quo. We have to now take to the streets. We have to figure out other ways to get your attention and to spread the word across the country to communities who are not specifically involved in what's going on right now, but need to know so they can support the effort as well. What we see in Minneapolis and Minnesota is the urgency of the situation because of the murders that have taken place of two citizens. But we also see that people believe their voices were not being heard. More ICE agents were brought in, and they had to figure out, and this is primary to protest, creatively, how do we navigate this system? The people that we are, if you're a protester, opposing have control of the finances, usually, the police departments and the government. So that means that regular people have to figure out creatively, how do you oppose them? But you can't just use their tools. You have to also create other ways in which that same message can get across, and you can push them in a way that says we will not tolerate this action in our community.
So it's navigating the system, Professor, but also it's disrupting the system.
It must disrupt. And that's the difference, I would say, between a rally where you're actually getting people of the similar concerns together in one place, that you can voice those concerns and people say, oh, I see you and you are concerned as I am. Let's do this together, because the collective, that unity is so powerful when it comes to the people. That's the power of the people. Now you take the power of the people and you actually have a plan. This is what we're going to do with that people power. We're going to use it in this particular way. And we're going to have to stop the status quo from acting as it normally does. And in doing so, that disruption, and nonviolence can disrupt. You know, people think violence is the only way that things are disrupted. No, sit-ins disrupt, because you can't have business as usual, as you saw during the civil rights movement. Many people may or may not know, because when they were segregated by race, then people of color, African Americans, would sit in those restaurants and they could not carry out business. Therefore, business is disrupted. That was done in a nonviolent way. So there are ways in which you can stop ICE, people blowing their whistles and saying, okay, we're not going to let you get to that person. We're going to block your way with our bodies. We're not going to hurt you, but we're going to stop you from getting to the person you're trying to apprehend. So those are nonviolent ways in which people can disrupt what is going on and get their message across, and try as best they can to show those people in leadership they must stop what they're doing.
I mean, I think for a lot of Americans, when they think about the civil rights era, that feels like the pinnacle in terms of effective, successful, meaningful protesting. And it has me wondering what you think about some of the more recent protests this country has experienced of, let's say, the last decade. I mean, we don't have the luxury of looking back many, many years as we can on the civil rights movement and connect it to important policy and legislation that has changed this country. But so far, from what we can see, how do you interpret the most recent protests? The movement for Black Lives, let's say, is one. The continuing protests for reproductive rights is another, which actually we'll get into that one in a moment, because that one's a little different.
Well, we can go back a little further. If we think about the anti-Vietnam War protests, those protests stopped a war. That's how effective protests can be. So we know that protests led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Protests led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Those protests mattered. Those protests that we saw against the Vietnam War ended the war. The protests also did something that, and we take them for granted. We forget that we've had these things happen. The reason why one can vote at age 18 is because there were protests against having the voting age at 21. They had to amend the U.S. Constitution to change the voting age from 21 to 18, because that's the age that was in the U.S. Constitution. So it wasn't the 18-year-olds who voted for this. No, that's the thing. That makes the core of the effectiveness. You have to get people who are not affected. Non-immigrants have to say, I'm going to stand up for those people who are undocumented. So the 21-year and older people who are voters had to be the ones to vote for changing the Constitution to reduce the age to 18. When it came to George Floyd and the protests around there, the diversity of the people in those crowds, in those protest marches, amazing, diverse around age. There were even George Floyd protests in other countries. Once again, they had to get people who were not in that affected group in Minneapolis, in that one particular neighborhood, who were not families of George Floyd, to believe in the cause and therefore lend their voices, their way in which they want to show their anger, their disagreement with the government. And at the same time, you had people who were the leaders of police departments taking a knee with protesters. to show that I'm in line with you. And policies changed. I know some policies were sent back, but there were other policies that were changed that are still in place because of those protests. So there were goals. What are we going to change as far as policy? It's not just the emoting that we want. We want to take that emotion, we want to channel it, we want to have goals, we're going to use it strategically and come out with outcomes.
Is that what it takes to build a successful movement with a lot of momentum? Is that diversity of people coming together? And would you say that the calls to abolish ICE coming from Minneapolis and across the country are growing into a movement now, as we see a lot of non-immigrant and more diverse communities coming together in this interest?
It's definitely a movement. And as I said, the rallies that you think about, the rallies that Dr. King used to lead when he would speak at these rallies, that's what we had in the very beginning. So now it's like we're on the same page. We understand. Before, there were a lot of different silos, and people still have other issues that they care deeply about, but they're finding the common ground. And I said this months ago, that we have to find the common ground. And once you find the common ground, you can come together. We're not going to be in complete lockstep, but we are going to be in a way in which, as we move forward, now we are going to look at who are going to be the leaders to emerge from this. That's the tricky part we don't see that we saw earlier. We had a Tom Hayden from University of Michigan, who was part of the student protest movement, a leader of the student protest movement there. We need teach-ins. That's something you don't see that we had before. You don't see the churches involved, the moral compass, because those churches were in many ways part of the capitulation of this Donald Trump administration. They went first before he even got into office. That's one of the reasons why he's in office, is because the churches capitulated. Where in the civil rights movement, you did see the churches as part of it. But now you're going to have that void filled by other organizations and maybe union leaders who then come in and fill the space that churches filled before. But it's definitely a movement. We're in need of goals, and what those goals are that need to be articulated. And I'll give you this one last example. During the time period of segregation, in which college students traveled to the South to help in the civil rights movement there, they knew, because there was a clarion call nationwide of what people can do to help. We haven't had that. We haven't had the nationwide clarion call because we don't have national leaders at this point. And maybe that's because the media capitulated in many ways, not this station, but others. It's like some of the legacy media. Yeah, some of the other legacy media and the law firms capitulated. And we used to have the law firms, the major law firms, that were part of assisting in the litigation needed to help the people who were arrested and others. So there are ways in which the movement is going to go forward, but it might not be exactly the same type of movement from the visible way of looking at it that it was during the civil rights movement.
Professor, before we break in a minute here, I want to think about another movement and what we've learned from it, one that you've studied deeply. You argue that Roe v. Wade was a real but fragile victory. It was grounded in court precedent without, though, being fully protected by legislation or long-term political power. When the Supreme Court overturned Roe after decades of organized backlash, what did that reveal about where that movement, the movement for reproductive rights, fell short?
Of all the people I'm going to quote, this is so inappropriate, but it will be Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson, yes, he should not know, but Tom is a shady character in many ways when it comes to women's rights.
Indeed.
But indeed, but he said the price of freedom is vigilance. And we need to understand that we assume when we make these progressive moves forward that they're going to remain. No, we have to stay vigilant, because the other side is saying that's not the way we envision the country. We envision a different way and a different outcome, and we're going to keep working toward our outcome. So the entire time, I would say at least 90% of the time period in which Roe v. Wade was in place, the other side that did not want to see women have this type of reproductive freedom was working on their way to undermine it. That's why it's not just a protest against, but there has to be a vision forward. what is our vision forward? So when it comes to our autonomy for females, in my book, A Protest History of the United States, we've seen the womb has been a battleground for centuries. This is not new. And so what do women want going forward? And what is the game plan for that? And how are we going to get this movement of people to see our issues as well? Because too often when we have a movement, sometimes we're not thinking about how do we participate in it, but also don't get lost to the point that people forget that I had another issue. I'm joining this one, but I haven't forgotten my core concern. And I need you to see my core concern as well and lend your voice over here. So I hope women will figure out a way to not lose themselves in a manner that people forget about the female autonomy and the issue of Roe versus Wade, that folks need to say, no, it's a regime that's undermining rights across the board. And this particular one is what we're fighting right now.
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. I'm speaking with Professor Gloria J. Browne-Marshall. She's the author of A Protest History of the United States. We're discussing the protests against ICE and successful movements of the past. Coming up, we'll continue this conversation about when protests are effective and what they've been like in Minneapolis and across the U.S. Stay with us. Sounds of protesters from across the country voicing their contempt for ICE. This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest is Professor Gloria J. Browne-Marshall. She's the author of A Protest History of the United States. And we're discussing the protests against ICE and also talking about what it takes to have an effective protest and the many things that fall under the umbrella of resistance in the U.S. Professor, I know that you believe that America was founded on protest. I mean, in your book, you write about indigenous resistance as the original, longest-running protest in what has become the U.S. Later, Americans fought to change labor rights, civil rights, and other freedoms that we've discussed. Of course, there are some people who believe that this country is not about protest. In fact, it's about maintaining some amount of order to produce and consume goods, to uphold capitalism, to keep the family structure intact. What do you make of that perspective, that America, in fact, is not a country rooted in protest, but one that's trying to keep things the way they are?
I think that the United States of America has had a dual personality from the beginning. So you have the United States, and this is how I put it in my analysis in my book, A Protest History of the United States, that the United States is the empire builder, that it's the one that wants the law and order, that side. And then you have America, which is symbolized by the Statue of Liberty, in which it's saying, bring us, your tempest tossed, longing to breathe free. So you have the sense of liberty and the sense of the capitalism. And those two have been at odds the entire time. I say these dual twins that become the United States of America. And so those that believe in, the status quo in law and order and the family structure, those were the people who had those beliefs during slavery, during the time period of which, Native American land was taken, during the oppression of Chinese Americans with the Chinese Exclusion Act. So there have been so many ways in which this conflict has shown itself, where people come into the country as immigrants, they become a part of the status quo after fighting for their own recognition, just to turn around and put their foot on the next group. And you're seeing this even at this time. There are people, and I know of some of these people, who have undocumented relatives but voted for Donald Trump. And so so this is always this conflict. And I'll do this one quick thing. This is a major, very quick history lesson. This country did not begin with the Pilgrims. It began in 1607 in Virginia with ships that came from England, part of a business charter. This was a charter. This was a business relationship. But in those ships, rowing the boats, were the people seeking liberty. So even at the time, you have the conflict between those who were business people looking for land in the New World to start this colony that would be a colony from England to make money for England, and those people who wanted a new life who were rowing the boat there. So we're going to always have this conflict between those people, and then those people get there who wanted liberty just to oppress the indigenous people who are in Virginia, or what's been called now Virginia at that time. So this is an ongoing struggle that we see in this country, that what is it to be America is to have both of those things.
Professor, we have run out of time here, and so I've just got one last thing to talk about with you in the last minute or so that we have. You say that liberty and capitalism are at odds in this country. Is there a world where the two can coexist?
Well, I visited Norway. They seem to be getting along quite well. There are other countries. We never look at the countries that are doing well. They probably want to stay out of the limelight because we'll figure out a way to undermine them. But I just say that the power of the people to try to find a balance. Yes, people want to live nice lives, and at the same time, they want their freedoms and liberty. So that's been the power of the people and the power of the government to find that balance. There was an attempt to do that. Sometimes it goes askew, which is what's happening right now, in which the empire building has taken a force within the country that's well beyond, I believe, what the framers wanted. And that's why the people have to right the ship.
Professor Gloria J. Browne-Marshall. She's the author of A Protest History of the United States. Professor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Power to the people.
It's the Metro on WDET, and today we're mourning the loss of Ishmael Ahmed. Ishmael was a champion of economic and racial justice, diversity, and community organizing. He was a co-founder of Access, the Concert of Colors. He helped start the Arab American National Museum, and he hosted music programs like This Island Earth right here on WDET. Ishmael's work touched millions of lives in Michigan and beyond. If you have a memory of Ishmael you'd like to share, we invite you to leave a voice message on the WDET mobile app. Tap the open mic button on the bottom right corner of the screen, or you can write your memory in an email and send it to wdetdigital@wdet.org. We'll continue to honor Ishmael's life and legacy this week on WDET. Coming up on the Metro, this year's 2026 Kresge Eminent Artist, Tyree Guyton, joins the show to discuss his life, legacy, and 40 years of the Heidelberg Project. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. We'll be right back after the news.